We have concluded that the UFOs understood to be unidentified objects guided by someone extraterrestrial exist. But who are those pilots? There isn't an official reply. Obviously, some people who say that they've had contact with them have spoken about them. Some of the extraterrestrials would be benevolent, worried about our future. Others would take organic substances from kidnapped terrestrials, a worrying fact. But is the UFO phenomenon new? Not according to numerous experts. The Vedic, Sumerian, Egyptian, Maya, and Aztec texts would talk diffusely about visitors from the stars. And even the circles in the cornfields, revealed in many countries over the last few years, would connect the ancient traditions with messages from faraway civilizations in space. The UFO subject matter is covered by state secrets. What can be hidden behind the curtain of official silence? And why the secret? It is the theme of this last program. We are entering a hypothetical field, certainly, but with many pertinent questions. We base ourselves above all on American materials. What is hidden behind the top secret?
In November 1961, a secret meeting of leading government-sponsored astronomers was held to estimate the number of planets in our own galaxy with intelligent life. These scientists concluded that there are probably 40 to 50 million intelligent extraterrestrial civilizations in our galaxy alone. There is ever-increasing evidence that some of these extraterrestrial civilizations are visiting the Earth. In a 1978 Gallup poll, 68% of Americans who expressed an opinion said that they believed UFOs are real. That poll also revealed the higher the level of education, the more likely a person is to believe that UFOs are real. 13 million adult Americans believe that they have seen a UFO.
This Egyptian papyrus describes a luminous display which startled the armies of Thutmose III. The Greeks and Romans, too, observed UFOs, and the curiosity they aroused during the Renaissance is evident from engravings and newspaper accounts of the time. The miniaturist Hans Glaser illustrated the Nuremberg sighting of 1561. Five years later, the Basel Gazette reported that at the hour of sunrise, many big black balls were seen in the air, traveling at great speeds toward the sun, then crashing into one another as if they were fighting. A great number of them became red and inflamed before being extinguished.
Abductions, in my assessment of this, there is no question there is an abduction phenomenon, and it is not, as has been argued by some people, most notably Dr. Stephen Greer, simply a military phenomenon. In fact, I think it's irresponsible to make this argument. There is something... Yes, you can clap for that. It boggles my mind, to be perfectly candid here, that a researcher can make such a blanket statement. You have a phenomenon that's gone on globally for a long time. You have individuals that are describing highly consistent things in terms of their abduction experience. And I don't know what else it can be other than a kind of religious-like zeal that can cause a person blindly to say the only abductions that occur are military. This I find indefensible. And I think that a careful review of the evidence certainly
December
needs
25th, 1952. Famous mathematician Lancelot Hogben called upon the scientific community to send radio signals deep into the solar system. Hogben said he had no desire to visit Mars, but it might be a good idea to have a few chats with the Martians before sending rockets across space for a possible unfriendly reception. Hogben planned to send a simple code through a series of radio messages in the hope that extraterrestrials would receive and decode them, and then send some kind of response. Did extraterrestrials receive these signals? And did we get a response which has resulted in one of the biggest cover-ups in human history? March 4th, 1954. Over 3 years before the launch of the first man-made satellite Sputnik 1, the Los Angeles Times released an article suggesting that scientists had reason to believe that some small objects may be orbiting the Earth. Clyde Tombaugh, the discoverer of the planet Pluto, and Dr. Lincoln La Paz, an astronomer from the University of New Mexico and a pioneer in the study of meteors, were assigned to search for the orbiting bodies. 2 months later, Major Donald Kehoe, the head of the biggest UFO research organization at the time called the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, announced in an interview that 1 or 2 artificial satellites in an unfamiliar retrograde orbit had been detected by Air Force radar at White Sands. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch and the San Francisco Examiner released stories about the detection. The reports contained a notice from Canadian government scientists asking any skywatchers to be especially alert and called for them to report any unidentified aerial objects that they had seen over the previous 2 weeks. Aviation Week broke the same story in August 1954. They confirmed Kehoe's claim that there were 2 large objects orbiting the Earth, one at 400 miles and one at 600 miles above the Earth. They claimed that the objects were natural space rocks or asteroids, but scientists soon rejected the notion that Earth could capture natural objects that would take a retrograde orbit around the planet. In January 1960, the Dark Fence satellite surveillance system detected another anomalous object which this time was in polar orbit. The commanding officer of Dark Fence raced to the Pentagon and reported the menacing stranger to the Chief of Naval Operations, and within minutes the news was communicated to President Eisenhower and marked as top secret. 3 weeks after its discovery, it was made public and featured on the front page of many newspapers. The article stated that 2 months before this, Discoverer 8 had been fired into space and was still in orbit. But Navy trackers who keep a watch on all space objects said they knew the exact whereabouts of the Discoverer rocket casings.
The person that Steven Spielberg modeled a character of a UFO researcher on in his classic movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
I think he was intrigued with the idea of a French scientist running around the United States investigating the UFO phenomenon.
You've been looking at this phenomenon for a long time. You've worked closely with Dr. Alan Hynek and other UFO researchers. You've written many authoritative books, and yet your perspective on the UFO issue seems rather unique in the sense that you don't seem to be jumping on the extraterrestrial visitors bandwagon.
That's what was the main point of disagreement with Steven Spielberg. When I met Steven Spielberg, he was about halfway through filming Close Encounters, and we had a long discussion about what UFOs could be. And of course, for him, the main point of the movie was entertainment, and it was appropriate for the UFOs to be extraterrestrial visitors. I think that from my own point of view, I'm going to be very disappointed if UFOs turn out to be nothing more than visitors from another planet, because I think they could be something much more interesting.
Something from another dimension of space or time?
I think what the UFO phenomenon is teaching us is that we don't understand time and space. Mm-hmm. Here are objects, I think we have to call them objects, that are physical, that interact with the environment, that cause effects on the witnesses, on the psychology and the physiology of the witnesses, and leave traces on the ground, and yet are capable of, appear to be capable of manipulating time and space in ways that go beyond what our physics understands today.
In your books, particularly your most recent book, Messengers of Deception, which is many years old, you suggest that UFOs are deliberately trying to manipulate our subconscious mind to create a mythology in our culture about themselves, which is one of the reasons that they're both physical and concrete, yet very elusive at the same time. Do you still feel that way?
I think to answer that, I'm not trying to evade your question, but to answer that, you have to step back,
Okay.
you know, a little bit farther. What we know today about the UFO phenomenon is considerably more than we knew 20 years ago or 10 years ago. And we have to understand it at three different levels. And the first level is the physical level. And all we can say about UFOs at the physical level is that it's a lot of energy in a small space. In the space of this, if we could take the energy of a nuclear reactor and contain it within this studio, for example, you'd have something that would approximate what a UFO does. It's a lot of energy in a small space emitted through light energy and through pulsed microwave energy. The second level is what happens to witnesses, what would happen to you and me if we were close to that source of energy. And again, now we're beginning to understand the physiological and the psychological correlations of a close encounter.
Yes.
And those have to do with a loss of the sense of space, loss of orientation. I've had witnesses tell me